Hello and welcome to this webcast, Cloud Computing in the Analytical Lab, the strategic risks, challenges and opportunities to consider. This webcast is hosted by Scientific Computing World and sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Our guest panelists today are Matt Hazelwood, Vice President and General Manager of Mass Spectrometry and Chromatography Software at Thermo Fisher Scientific, Christopher Boone, Group Vice President of Health and Life Sciences Research Services at Oracle, and Andreas Steinler, Digital Integration Lead at PTD Pennsburg. From his early career as a chemist to leading Thermo Fisher's software business unit, Matt Hazelwood has more than 20 years' experience in enterprise software. He has a unique perspective on cloud technologies and can drive innovation and accelerate scientific research. Christopher Boone brings extensive expertise in clinical research informatics, real-world evidence and health equity from his previous roles at AbbVie and Pfizer, alongside his academic post as an adjunct assistant professor at New York University. Andreas Steinler is an experienced digital transformation leader known for his extensive background in developing and implementing digital strategies at Roche and GeneTech. Thank you to each of our speakers today for joining us today. Now, on to the topic of today's discussion. Scientific research today generates more data than ever before, but with that comes escalating risks, security breaches, compliance failures, and lost intellectual property. Mishandling this data doesn't just slow innovation, it can derail entire research projects and expose your organization to costly regulatory penalties. Cloud computing offers a powerful solution if implemented correctly. Without a clear strategy, however, labs risk expensive missteps, vendor lock-in, and integration headaches with legacy systems. This exclusive panel discussion will equip you with actionable strategies to safeguard research data in cloud environments while meeting IP protection and compliance requirements. Develop a cloud adoption roadmap tailored to your research or lab operations. Select the right cloud technologies in a crowded and complex market, and future-proof your lab by preparing your data and research team for next generation software. After the discussion, there will be a question and answer session, which anyone can use to ask our speakers a question. If the speakers do not have time to answer your question today, the information will be passed along to the relevant people so they can follow up at a later date. So without further ado, our first question for the panelists. How is cloud computing impacting scientific laboratories? Matt, would you like to take the first stab at this one?
Yes, so thank you for having us, and thank you for everybody attending. I think what we're seeing with our customers is really the drive to provide access to data for everyone, right? Everyone who is authorized to access that data. So I've been working in this role or a similar role in scientific software for 20 years. And we saw the move, first of all, to data centers in regions and then data centers globally. But now cloud is making this a heck of a lot easier for end users to access data in centralized locations and access that data 24/7, 365. So we're also seeing changes in the IT landscape, right? So our customers are moving away from data centers, as I said, in region or global environments with physical servers. And what they're doing is they're focusing on the reduced tactical system administration responsibilities so that this can free up IT on more strategic tasks. So we're actually seeing a cost savings exercise and an increase in productivity by moving to cloud environments, or our customers are, at least anyway. Our customers are preparing for integration of AI. So cloud environments, of course, facilitate the integration of AI technologies into the daily operations. And that's occurring, as we're seeing, in research predominantly, but also moving down into more applied and routine environments. We can also see the need, a significant need actually, since data files are getting larger, to provide horizontal scalability for data processing of large files, such as the mass spec data, accurate mass files, which can generate gigabytes of data in a single day. So I think those are the primary drivers for many of our customers that we're looking at.
Christopher, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Matt has described. I think from my perspective, I would just add that the ability to sort of integrate diverse data types is important. We're seeing expanded use of real world evidence, obviously, and discovery efforts in many of our life sciences and pharma companies. And there's also interest in using genomic sequencing data, proteomic data, clinical trial data, all of these things. And of course, many of the instruments that are producing much of the screening outputs have also created much more of a unified analytical environment. And that's one of the big things that our Oracle Cloud infrastructure guys are pushing, is the ability to unify the data in addition to sort of, I would say democratizing the data for lack of better terms, but just the idea of moving from those central locations, as Matt described, to much more global access. I think the ability to do, and we saw this a lot during the pandemic, is the ability to do sort of the global data sharing is important. So you hope that you see more cross-institutional research opportunities that I think didn't necessarily exist before, because you had those local on-prem data environments for much of the research that was being captured. So I think the big thing that I would sort of add to what Matt said is the unification of data, the democratization of data, and the ability to see much more of the cross-institutional collaboration, which I think is a huge thing for innovation.
And Andreas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we are working now since years on verification of data, right? And one of the challenges for Roche is have access to the data. And this is much more convenient on the cloud, right? If you have a central storage, but also make it findable, right? You can imagine over 200 sites across Roche. It's hard to find the right data if this is not in a central repository. And then this is possible with a cloud now, right? Also the compute power. Maybe we invest a lot on sustainability in Roche, and also cloud helps us to achieve our sustainability goals, because now not all the data centers are idle in the night. We can use the compute power from the cloud providers when it's needed, right? And as both said before, we're creating so much data, much more data sets as we have seen before. And if you talk about next generation sequencing, right, it's really a challenge in how we deal with all these huge data sets. And if you now start all these journeys, when we talk today about maybe AI, you will see this is only possible in a cloud. It cannot be handled on a local data center.
So maybe I can add one more comment there, because Andreas, thank you. You reminded me of something, right? So much data. We've got instruments that, upwards of $1 million generating gigantic amounts of data per day. The teams that interpret that data don't necessarily need to be co-located with the instruments, right? And I think that's a key aspect of this as well, right? That if the data is in the cloud, the teams who interpret that data don't need to be co-located with the instruments that are running the analysis. And we're seeing that as a significant driver in the industry as well.
So yeah, on that point of teams don't need to be co-located with the data. How does cloud computing kind of help to facilitate collaboration, whether it be within an organization or with different kind of cross-institutional research, as you mentioned there, Christopher? Who would like to go on this one first? Maybe Christopher, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I think I'll build on that point of having the data in the cloud, not necessarily being co-located with the instruments. I think that works the same thing with research teams as well. You have the ability to have controlled access to many of these shared data sets. So you do have that ability. I think typically when you go into this, you want a few things from a researcher's perspective. You want traceability, you want a level of, you want the capability to do reproducibility, and I think auditability. I mean, depending on your audit ability, depending on what your particular use case is. And I think that when you have this sort of shared environment that's actually centrally controlled in a cloud environment, you're breaking down many of those, I would call traditional barriers that exist between many of the disciplines. and you're sort of enabling their ability to sort of work cross-functionally, and also be able to sort of create this end-to-end data governance, which I think is important through the cloud computing capabilities. So I think that when you talk about cross-institutional, and I go back to the example I used earlier with the pandemic, you had many organizations that were initiating research to determine vaccines or therapies for COVID. In the past, they wouldn't have necessarily been able to share that data, but we found ways using cloud computing to unlock that for many folks. And I think that that's why we got to a vaccine much faster than we would have in any other circumstance. And I think that so that model is really sort of reimagining research. It's not just about computing power or just an IT sort of investment, but it's more or less, how do you reimagine research now that you have this capability to sort of work across different institutions to sort of not be co-located with the instruments, and also unify all these various data types that we weren't necessarily able to unify before.
Okay, so it's more than just accelerating productivity as such, but also kind of changing the model by which research is undertaken. Would you have anything to add to that, Andreas?
Well, you can imagine, so in our technical development, we are sitting in Europe and Germany and Switzerland, and the colleagues sitting on the West Coast in US, right? And if the folks end the day, if you have the cloud implemented correctly, or the solutions in the cloud, the data accessible immediately. So it means you can work 24/7 without interruption, and you must not keep care about how I can move large data sets. Because this was always a challenge, right? This is locally in your local data center, how I can share this with my US folks at Genentech. Should I send a CD or D4D, or how we did this in the past, right? But now it's one click, and it's so handy, right? Yes, there are some risks, absolutely true, but this is really the global collaboration. It's so great when you have the right cloud in place, right? It's more the business perspective, not so much the technical view here.
Yeah.
And Matt, is any final comments? It's always a bit more difficult to go last when.
I agree with all of the above. Yeah, I agree with all of the above. But I think I think Chris, you mentioned this about data with a consistent structure, or maybe a similar ontology, right? If you've got data that's consistent in a centralized environment, it's going to allow users to run algorithms or find patterns that they wouldn't have been able to find before, right? So how does it enhance collaboration? I mean, I think the information sharing in a centralized location allows end users to actually find patterns and increase productivity and give them insights that they wouldn't have had if the data was not co-located, right? So, yeah, other than that, I agree with everything that was said. Yeah.
Okay, so it's partially also about kind of just breaking down data silos then, and having data accessible to these various teams, so that to facilitate that collaboration.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of almost cringing when we say democratizing data, but that's essentially what it is, right? Yeah.
So you guys have mentioned genomics data and kind of and also kind of chromatography files as being quite large data sets, and what are the main challenges that labs face when managing large volumes of data, and how does cloud help you address these challenges? Andreas, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, for all of our data, we have data centers in place, right? Every company has this. But this will not scale with this large data sets, right? So, and it's so handy in a cloud to increase the space, the storage, but also put it on a cold storage, right? Which is much more affordable for every company. And this is really where we see there is it's not an efficiency gain, it's a cost saving, right? When we have this cloud in place and can store it with the scalability in the background, what we have not seen before. Also, the utilization of our resources of the hardware is really important. And we have these data centers with a fire protection system and all what we need to run a data center. And we can reduce our data centers in the future when we put more and more to cloud storage. And every cloud vendor have one prior one, and this is security, data security, right? This is the core business model. And we see also a lot of people have access to our data centers. It could be external companies, it could be internal people. It's not that only 2 people go to the servers or to the data center. So we see also data security would be increased in the cloud. Could be, if you implement this right.
And Matt, what is your take on managing large volumes of data and kind of how cloud can help out there in that respect?
Yeah, so I think I agree. Andreas is correct from my perspective. I do think that our customers see the cloud environment as potentially more secure, which was not the case pre-COVID, right? I mean, this was not the case pre-COVID. This was the thinking in the industry, specifically in regulated environments, is that the cloud providers for large data sets are potentially more secure than the on-prem or hybrid solutions that are built into an organization today. And exactly for the reasons that Andreas mentioned, right, is that there are number of individuals who have access to an on-prem environment, which potentially could be a security concern. Now, there are some considerations about large data files, right? So if the large data file, if there's a data transfer between, say, for example, a processing environment, which is on-prem versus a processing environment in the cloud, then of course you've got cost considerations, right? So some of our customers are actually looking at hybrid environments where maybe metadata is stored in the cloud and large data sets are actually stored in data centers centralized, right? To just minimize the cost there. So I think it's an evolving thinking, but what I am seeing is a puzzle right now around these enormous data files and the company and customer strategies in order to manage those, right? And it's many different layers, but it's I think we're probably going to talk about cloud strategy a little bit later on. So maybe I'll just leave the rest of my thinking to when we get to that point.
Can I
absolutely. We'll save that for the next topic. Christopher, yeah, sorry, your thoughts. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, I mean, I just listened to the both of them. I think, and I think we talked about the diverse data types, or what most would call data heterogeneity of sorts. And I think the cloud environment and its flexibility allows for sort of the ingestion of many of those data types. And also I think another issue that was raised earlier was around scalability with the sheer size of the data files. And I think that cloud allows for a certain level of elasticity with storage, and so it's dynamic and it allows for that adjustment. I think another point that was raised is around sort of governance, and I also equate that to, I think one of the points you raised, Andreas, is it's around efficiencies gained, and I thought that was a key point to highlight, because one of the things that is often understated is the efficiencies gained just by the sheer reduction in many of those routine or manual administrative tasks that most people engage in, which you hope allows people to get back to the core work that they do, which is research, and not be sort of bogged down with many of those administrative tasks. So I think as folks are looking at the total cost of the investment, it's not just tech cost savings, but it's also the efficiencies gain, which allow you to do focus more on what your core job is and not the administrative tasks that are associated with it.
Let me add something here. Always when we talk about large data sets, maybe a lot of people have an old mindset there, and they believe you must transfer large data set from on-prem to the cloud as a file, right? But what we see, the streaming technology is the key of that, right? So how many people streaming Netflix every day? And these are large data sets, right? But you not download the movie, right? You see only the next second there. And this is the key where also the instruments vendor must change the mindset to say, okay, we must enable our instruments to stream the data to a cloud environment. This is where I see the key of these large data sets, where we can get rid of this on-prem technology, where it's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I think one comment on that is that I think for us, that is the ideal. You're absolutely right. The challenge that we need to face as an industry, though, is what happens during the event of a network outage, right? So typically what we have, right, is we have a box attached to a PC that does the buffering. And then in the event of a network outage, the PC is the buffer that then transfers data across the network. That's been the way that the instrument vendors have, all instrument vendors essentially have been doing this for the last 20 plus years, right? And we have to change that model if we're going to be streaming data to the cloud, which needs to be the goal, right? That needs to be the goal. We need to be able to stream data to the cloud. Andreas, loved the analogy there with Netflix. Absolutely correct. Yeah. So there are some technological challenges we have to manage, but I completely agree with Andreas's assessment there.
But you hit on the point earlier, though, when you mentioned the hybrid approach, right? I mean, I think that's one potential solution for that, right?
That's one potential solution for it as well. Yeah, exactly.
Ellie, you mentioned the mindset change and people, just thinking that the cloud is now more secure than potentially on-prem. When do you think that change took place, and kind of, what was it that kind of drove that forward? Matt, would you like to take this one?
I think it was COVID and the COVID pandemic and individuals really starting to embrace cloud solutions more than ever before. Office 365, Teams, storing your personal data in OneDrive, right? I mean, that was a change of mindset as well. But there were also a number of, I'm not going to call them out specifically, but high-profile data breaches in regulated environments, which really caused those customers to look at, or those companies to look at potential other solutions. But I think there's also been an evolution in the cloud providers, right, in terms of recognizing the standards that they need to abide by, such as HIPAA, such as GDPR, such as GMP regulations 21 CFR 11, and so on. So it's been a multifaceted move that I think the industry has come a long way. I mean, if we're looking at Thermo Fisher, our first thinking is really, can we sign up for a solution that is cloud provided through a SaaS solution, right? That's our first. 5 years ago, that would not have been the case.
Christopher, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that? It seems to be a kind of a combination of different factors as opposed to just one thing, but COVID was the kind of tipping point there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's been highlighted is the fact that it's not a technology sort of implementation, if you will, but it's more sort of it's more change management is probably a bigger hurdle to overcome than even just the implementation of technology. And a lot of that is too because you are asking folks to rethink how they do their existing jobs. We were just having a discussion around a researcher being connected right to their instrument, which is connected to their laptop right there, and we're trying to shift them to a cloud computing environment. And I think that feeling secure, knowing that data is accessible, knowing that there is a sort of a guaranteed uptime for that cloud environment, and really allowing them to rethink how they do their current jobs is going to be important. And a lot of that, I think, still boils down to sort of identifying high value use cases and viewing the investment in cloud computing as more of a business initiative or a business transformation than a technology initiative. And then I would sort of identify what those high value use cases are to many of those researchers and investigators that they know that they deem to be important, and make them part of the process. Because I do think that shift in mindset, that shift in working, and while the pandemic was certainly a catalyst for how we utilize many of the cloud technologies in our personal lives, I still think some people have some sort of resistance to that change in their work, in their professional lives. And we have to sort of, navigate that and usher them through it. And the best thing is to identify what the WIFM or the what's in it for them, with something that's important, that you make more efficient, that you make much more automated, and it frees up time. So it's really defining value for the end users is a big piece of it.
Andreas, do you agree with this sentiment? Have you seen a kind of, people being more receptive to cloud within your organization?
I mean, it's a little bit the experience, right? If you start using the cloud and thinking about that, you see the opportunities and you see the risks. And then you also understood, oh, your photos on your iPhone are stored in the Google Cloud, right? You're also already using the cloud. And especially, yes, if the kids are using Google at school, it's all in the cloud, right? We're also using, as a company, Google, and all your files are stored in the cloud. Nobody thinks about that before. And we implemented our ELN as a software as a service solution. And it was much more faster with the provisioning of the infrastructure, right? Because this is provided by the vendor. And we realized, wow, this is cool, not provisioning server, talking to IT, argumenting why you need a little bit more CPU or RAM, right? So really, step by step, everyone understands, wow, there's a lot of value. And also you understood the risk, right? Every cloud provider can name what is the risk and how you can overcome this. And I would say the step by step was the key. And also for a pharmaceutical company, you see our, or the other companies also doing the same way, right? And there must be a good reason. And so then you start also thinking about and exploring it. And then you see the benefits about that.
Absolutely. So I think I probably should move us on to our next topic. Although that was very interesting conversation. Guys, beyond cost, what is the most important consideration or considerations when selecting a cloud platform? Christopher, would you like to go first on this one?
I think that I would also, and I mentioned this earlier, the ability to sort of have that dynamic storage or sort of computational elasticity is important. I think that I would consider that. I would consider the, and I think Mark, you mentioned this earlier as far as the geographic capabilities and having it versus, in one central location or on-prem versus sort of dispersed amongst different geographies. I think that's important. I think I would also consider sort of functional scalability. So I think depending on which division or function you lead and what type of research you're doing, you will probably need certain capabilities that are workflows that don't necessarily exist in other areas. I think that one of the big mistakes that folks probably make in their investment, and I've seen this before, is sort of having short-term thinking when they're making this investment. So they're looking at short-term sort of cost savings rather than the long-term value. And the long-term value in this case for me is sort of the reimagination of how research is done in these labs, right? And so if you just look at it as a near-term, I'm going to shift from on-prem, I need less IT support to the cloud. I think that's you're probably not maximizing the value or the investment that you're making in that. I think in the space of life sciences, especially, when you're not planning appropriately for compliance, adherence in many of the different countries and nations that you're dealing with, especially with all the different types of data that we're dealing with, that can be a huge consideration. And working with a cloud partner that sort of acknowledges and also understands those requirements, I think is important. I also think that organizational readiness. I mean, and we're talking about that, like how do you sort of, you don't have to necessarily go with a big bang approach of everything in the cloud immediately. I think that there could be some phased approach to how you implement and working with a partner that has that level of flexibility. One of the examples we brought up earlier was the sort of hybrid cloud environment where you have on-prem and you have some some assets in the cloud, or you have the sort of, depending how you want to use it for backup or downtime purposes, and how you use the on-prem versus the cloud environment, or even from a cloud to cloud sort of integration perspective. Some folks are already on Google Cloud or AWS or Oracle or whatnot, and they want to maintain multiple cloud environments in their organization. So I think depending on your particular situation, that's something that I would also consider as well.
Matt, what are your thoughts on this topic for kind of considerations for selecting cloud platforms?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the problem is you're trying to solve, right? So it's assess really where you are, right, and determine what your needs and objectives are, right? So I think there's a number of different aspects of this. So many of the companies that we speak to, it's really around uptime needs, right? Time to recovery, whether or not the cloud provider and the implementation will support data privacy needs, whether or not data sovereignty needs are met, right? So as soon as data essentially goes out of a region or is stored in a different region, what are the laws impacting or affecting the data, your data, right? Because they could be impacted by laws in a different region. We also do have some customers that we speak with that have preferences for a cloud provider based on the market and the capabilities of the cloud provider to support that market. Other than that, I mean, I think it's as Chris said, right? It's around the compliance aspects, the data privacy standards, and the ones that were impacted most with the individuals that we deal with, primarily around HIPAA and GDPR in Europe, of course.
Andreas, do you have anything to add to this topic?
Yeah. I would be carefully when you select a cloud provider if the cloud provider have the right vision. So it means few cloud providers are focused on consumers, right? And not on B2B, which is challenging. Sometimes you don't need always the newest hype, right? You need also stability, especially when you talk about a GXP environment, what we find usually in the pharmaceutical industry, right? And then this would the next consideration there to say, look on a cloud provider, they have experience in GDPR, GXP, and maybe can provide a pre-configured environment. If you start explaining what GXP means, maybe it's the wrong provider for a pharmaceutical industry. But what we have also seen in Roche, a single cloud strategy is also challenging. Be aware there are corner cases where you must also work with an additional cloud provider, because only this cloud provider have the super cool functionality where the researcher's looking for. And we have seen this on all big vendors, right? And we will see this also in the future. So be carefully on saying this is a single provider. So my thoughts.
I think that's totally fair. Can I just add one point which I forgot? I think Chris, you touched on this. It's starting small, right? You're not going to be able to boil the ocean with a cloud solution from the outcome or the outset. So we actually encourage a pilot, evolve, and scale approach. And the pilot is a small, maybe a single product, maybe in a single geographic region, right? And take the learnings from that and evolve and scale as you go. If you try and do too much too soon, right, the cloud strategy we find typically has evolution problems, right?
Yeah, on that point, we're starting small. Christopher, you mentioned short-term thinking and planning for compliance. What are best practices or advice you could give to an organization that wants to create their own cloud strategy? Andreas, would you like to go first on this one?
Yeah, I would say this is a little bit challenging from the Roche perspective. I would say train your people, right? Because a cloud environment gives you a lot of opportunities, but also needs a mindset shift. And if your whole organization sticks to the old mindset, where they like to be buying metal, like servers, right? It's really hard to make progress there. But you must upskill your workforce to get out the best of the cloud beyond the technology. The technology is one. But I would say start with the right workforce. You need some external companies for that, right? But the most companies have this not in-house. But I would say this is the key.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like anytime you're going to introduce a new technology, you want to make sure that you can kind of manage that change and have your organization kind of, join in and take on that process as wholeheartedly as possible. Christopher, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I would always start with a business objective and start with some sort of business priority or imperative that you set as an organization, and then you determine how the technology sort of aligns with that. So if you chose something in this particular case, I want to accelerate our research timelines, and you set that as a sort of an objective or an OKR for your organization or your business, and then you now know what your aim is, and you know how to structure your approach as you're going into it. You also know, back to the earlier point of having industry-specific knowledge and what the challenge and what sort of regulatory considerations you have to have, and local laws and all of that. I would then, and as you once you identify that sort of business objective that you have, that's business focused, not necessarily technology, then you go through that process of the standard process of what's our current data assets. So you're almost just doing some sort of current state analysis where you're looking across your organization and saying, what are all the data assets that we have? What are our current workflows that link to that? What is our governance approach with this data, if there is one? And some organizations don't have one, believe it or not. And then I think that once you get that sort of understanding of your current operations, then I think it's worth having those discussions. And I personally would suggest that folks consider forming some sort of cross-functional advisory council or steering committee of sorts, where you have business and technologists that are working together to sort of devise what the cloud computing strategy would be, and how you would prioritize what those high value use cases are and where you would start. And you make that decision, as Mark alluded to earlier, of how big do you want your pilot be and where to make that determination. As part of that, though, and as you mentioned this too, and we've sort of been going around this, but the people piece of it cannot be understated. And I don't think you want to wait until the end. So I do think sort of working through, what that change management philosophy and approach will be as you begin to roll this out, rather than waiting to the end, is probably, I think, one of the fails that some organizations make when they're rolling out this technology. And it's great, and you have all in the cloud, but then people aren't buying into it for whatever reason. And so I think putting some pretty heavy consideration on those on the change management piece would be important.
Matt, do you have anything that you would like to add to this point?
Pretty much in alignment, right? I mean, what problem are you trying to solve? And you need to bring individuals along for the ride, right? So what we recommend is that we would form a multifunctional cloud adoption team that is essentially the steering committee for the entire rollout. What I would say is maybe just the only other aspect of this is that it needs continuous monitoring and optimizing as you roll it out, right? So and even post rollout, right? Can you continue to optimize? And what we're thinking internally is don't be afraid to change the strategy, right? So the rollout of cloud, if it's in a pilot, you take the learnings from that and you optimize as you evolve, right? And then optimize as you scale. So I think those check-in points allow you to optimize as you move forward.
Oh, I mean,
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you just triggered a thought, because I think that there's a lot of advantages in working with cloud partners who have experience in your industry because you can leverage those learnings. And I think that, you know, oftentimes when you're working with companies, you want to be able to say, what have you learned from other folks as they roll this out? But more importantly, because you want that to be an input to how you craft your overall vision, right? And I think that that's the benefit of having, you know, partners who know your business and they know your industry, because then they can help you sort of set a vision long term, and you get out of that sort of near term thinking and you think long term about what all the possibilities are, and you sort of roll it out that way. I think that would be one of the considerations I would look to if I'm considering it, is what partner can help me unlock innovation or an approach that I can't currently do today or that I'm not even thinking of, perhaps. And I think that is, in addition to sort of owning and understanding the challenges within the industry, I think setting a vision for where you want to be in the next decade is important as well.
I agree 100%.
I mean, the vision is great, right? But I would also recommend to start with a really tangible use case for the business. Mm-hmm. Because if IT recommends go to cloud, it's the future, right? And this is our vision. It's always hard to understand for the business. What is the value? What is in for me? And if you can show the value to some senior leaders in the business, it makes the adoption much more easier, right? And we have also started to put a lot of data on the cloud to do some magic with that. Without the use case, it was not the best strategy, right? It helps us now, but at the beginning, it was hard to explain why we invest there. When we can show not an impact to the business, right? To bring a molecule faster to the market or something like that, or be more cost efficient. Starting with a use case would be one suggestion from my side.
Yeah, it seems that that's a really strong message coming from all of you guys, that the first point of this is the business use case, and then kind of building the strategy around that, and understanding, you know, where you can kind of really make a difference within your own organization. Okay, so what common pitfalls do laboratories face when choosing a cloud platform? I guess, Christopher, you already mentioned or talked about short-term thinking and how you'd seen that before. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're very focused on, I'm going to shift these costs that I currently have, or I can reduce the amount of IT support spend or the cost of supporting my own infrastructure in my environment, I think that's rather short-term or near-term thinking. I think that I tend to be a believer that, you know, when you have these sort of disruptive technologies, what it enables you to do is reimagine how you currently do it. And one of the big things that you think about with cloud computing, and we mentioned this earlier, is this idea. First of all, you get that end-to-end data governance, which I think is important, right? I mean, so you don't have you're not creating more data silos within your organization where it exists on one person's computer and not there, and not. So you're making that data accessible. I think is across the board. I think is important. But I also think too, because now you're removing that need to be so focused on manual data workflow management, which is what a lot of organizations engage in. You now have freed up capacity to be able to start to rethink how you're doing research overall, and how do you, because, my my prediction is now with the expanded adoption of cloud computing, as well as what we're seeing with AI and just the vast amounts of data that we have, you're going to see much more innovations that come out of life sciences that are much more cross-institutional, and it's going to be like a contingency of researchers and not just a single researcher or a group of researchers from a single organization. I think you're going to see a lot more collaboration on that's going to be unlocked, and we'll probably see much more sort of therapeutic innovation happening faster than we have in the past. So I think that's going to be pretty fascinating to watch. But I also think too, and we sort of glossed over, we haven't talked about it as much, but the data security piece is huge, right? I mean, there have been a number of breaches, and we're not going to call out any particular organizations, but I think that having sheer cybersecurity in this space, because at the end of the day, I mean, most of this data for all these organizations is their IP, and they want to be able to protect that, right? And so I think cybersecurity is certainly one of the key areas that I would sort of encourage everyone to think of as they're sort of investigating the possibility and all that. And I think the I'll also come back to this idea of data integration or the management of all the different types of data that we're now using in research is important. So those are the big points I would raise.
Matt, any other kind of common pitfalls, when selecting a cloud platform?
I think really it's not really understanding the responsibilities of the cloud provider and the company involved, right? So there are responsibilities that are really outlined in a service level agreement, but understanding the security components of that tends to be a challenge, right? Tends to be a challenge, and is one that we see companies questioning quite often. I want to touch on what Andreas mentioned as well a little bit earlier. So one of the problems that we have in the chromatography and mass spectrometry industry is that right now to stream data to the cloud is not really supported by any of the main vendors, and we need to evolve that thinking, right? As I mentioned before, we're thinking about instrumentation, data acquisition and instrument control in exactly the same way that we were doing 20 plus years ago, right? We've got to evolve that. So we have to enable our customers to be able to transfer data directly to the cloud while giving them a solution that manages network outages, manages buffering, and so on. And this is a big blocker today, right? It's something that the industry needs to solve as a whole. And I think the only other the thing that comes to mind right now is the one of costs, right? Costs can balloon if you don't have the appropriate cloud strategy in place from the outset. And again, I think this really goes back to the start small and scale, but you need to know where you're going to be in 5 years' time, right? That's the target you got to hit, and you got to figure out the T minus in order to get there. So the costs need to be a longer term consideration.
Just one final point on that streaming data point. What are the remaining technological roadblocks, or who's responsible for fixing this issue so that we can all move forward in this industry with kind of data streaming?
that would be I'll be one of those people who's responsible for fixing it. Yeah. So really, what it involves is right now we have data that's collected by a PC. The PC is the buffer that then streams to the cloud. We need to solve this as an industry. We are. Let me just say we're thinking about it internally. I'm just going to leave it at that. But every vendor knows that they need to solve this issue in order to have essentially a cloud supported offering for the majority of our customer base.
Is that an independent process? Do instrument vendors need to work together to come to a common solution, or is this something that it isn't necessary?
I think it's all of the above, right? So right now, instrument vendors need the ability to potentially store data at the instrument level. So if you think about maybe there's an embedded PC at the instrument level, on that the instrument stores the data and buffers that in the event of a network outage, right? That would be instrument specific. Ideally, it would be beneficial to the industry if that was standardized, right? And the instrument vendors do speak with one another, but I think we need to address this with criticality in order to meet the needs. Otherwise, a full lab going to cloud is going to be a challenging process.
Absolutely. I'm just conscious of time, so I want to move on to the next topic, if that's okay. How can cloud computing promote data security and compliance with an organization? I feel like this is a big topic that, as you said, we haven't kind of touched on too much at the moment. Andreas, would you like to go first on this point of kind of promoting data security and compliance using cloud?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you have a central point, right? You have not 200 teams across the globe where we provide different access. You have one central point where you can manage the security access there, right? What I have also seen on the most cloud providers, it's high sophisticated what they offer, right, on security control. This is really great, and I have not seen this before on every classical servers. audit trail and logging, all these topics. I mean, it's a huge topic. We can talk an hour about that, but I will also give Chris and Matt the chance to say something about that.
Christopher, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the most or one of the single greatest issues to address. I mean, one of the big things I think is, and we were talking about this earlier, sort of meeting those industry regulations, and then in the life sciences, if you don't have an understanding of GDPR, of HIPAA or GXP, and these data centers that you're working with that are part of your cloud partners network are not certified and have those automated compliance tools, I think that would sort of raise a red flag for me. I think the other piece of this, and Oracle is certainly very, very big on this, is those strategies to protect sensitive data. So you really want to start to consider adopting a zero trust sort of security model, using multi-factor authentication. I think is huge, and doing regular compliance and security audits of your is another area that I would harp on and think. I think the idea of using, and I sort of mentioned this earlier, the idea of access controls, because if you are going to have this sort of democratized approach to data, the beautiful thing about it is that you can centrally manage it and ensure that certain access is granted to certain individuals, and there's not sort of open access to all data where it's not appropriate. And that's just going to make sure that the data, the research data, remains secure and it continues to meet those industry regulations that are important.
And Matt, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, agreed with everything that's been said so far. I think the biggest security risk though is people, right? So we're going to make sure that the employees are trained and they're aware and they understand the policies, and the appropriate controls are in place to manage what individuals can do.
So I think you, Christopher, you mentioned kind of strategies to protect sensitive research data, multi-factor authentication being one I think that you mentioned. Are there any other areas where the organization itself can take a role in protecting their data? Obviously a cloud provider plays a big role in that, but what can an organization do to help protect their own data?
I think one of the things that you see doing a lot is those I think it's the people, right? That's your weakest point in the entire system. So the more you can train and retrain and do those sort of periodic checks. I always get the fake emails through Oracle's email that if you open it, it's you violated something or whatever. So I think those types of things that keep cybersecurity at the forefront of many of the end users in the research mind is important. So I think that's really where I think the bulk of it. I mean, I think from a technology perspective, you're going to use encryption, you're going to use the access controls, you're going to use multi-factor authentication, those sort of tech-enabled services. But I think the part that really is always the big question mark is staff or training of people, right? And that's the area that probably has to get a bit more attention than it has in the past.
Yeah, and Matt, that seems to kind of align with what you were just saying. Is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of what an organization can do to protect their data?
Yeah, I mean, so I think outside of the normal controls, and in terms of encryption, in terms of user controls, and in terms of maybe the only other thing I would think of at the moment is just to have a really solid disaster recovery plan in place. Right, so develop and test the disaster recovery plan to ensure your data can be quickly restored. We had one example of a customer who put a really good disaster recovery plan in place, and if a data center was out, and this is a hybrid environment, but if a data center was out, they were able to recover their entire organization across 7 sites within 15 minutes, which was phenomenal. So they really went about this in the right way, I believe.
Andreas, would you have anything to add to this point?
Yeah, I would say think about separating the data, right? it's always great. We talked in the last years about data lakes and lake houses and all the fancy names. But for example, when you have personal data, it should be separated, right? Because especially in Germany or also other countries, this should not be end in a data lake where to try to protect this data in a huge pool. You can put it on a separate cloud in a separate project. There are a lot of technical things how you can overcome this hurdle to really, and also for the research data. If you say this is really a project I not want to share with anyone in the company, then you should not try to control it, separate it in our own project.
Okay, so similar to kind of access controls in a way, by separating some of that data out, especially if it's personal or maybe patient data, can be an important part of that strategy. Okay, and on to our final kind of main topic. Many labs still use traditional systems. What are some effective ways to train staff and research teams, to best adapt to cloud-based tools and infrastructure? Andreas, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, you answered the question by yourself, right? Train the people. So, yeah, this would be important because it's a huge mindset shift, because a lot of our workforce have trained in traditional technologies, what was great, right? But if you now start talking about Terraform scripts and all the things what you need about the cloud, also when you talk about total cost of ownership, this is so complicated to calculate. And you need people, they have the open mindset to see, yes, there's a huge opportunity. I want to learn something. And I would start really training your own people, but also get external input there. There are a lot of good consulting companies, they can help you. They have seen a lot of mistakes and a lot of success, right? And they can help you to not make the same mistakes again as other companies have already done this. Point.
Absolutely. Christopher, what are your thoughts on training staff, to best use cloud tools? You mentioned not only kind of training, but also kind of testing people using emails and stuff like that previously.
Yeah, and the testing is just one example of sort of what I would just call just a continuous learning approach, right? I don't think the training is ever really complete. I think that initially what you want to start is probably role-based training. If you have a lab tech and you got a PI or a principal investigator, they're probably are going to look at things a little bit differently. So I would focus the training on the specific role and function of the individual. I would create a sandbox environment that allows them to play around and break things without really breaking things, so it's much more controlled. I think that another aspect of the continuous, I use the email as an example, but you can build it into certain applications where as an individual based on their role is doing certain things, there are certain cues, whether they're triggered by AI or whatnot, that would sort of advise that this is not, it's probably not what you really want to do. So I think those types of built-in controls are probably a good thing. And the thing that I stand by, and I think as you're rolling these things out, you always start with, some sort of identified super user group that ultimately becomes your champions for that technology and investment that helps with the facilitation of the change management piece. So while they initially will be the train-a-trainer type of approach, it ends up being the champions for the investment, and they become the go-to people. And as you want to, beta test new things, that would be the target group that you would leverage, and they can also sort of push it out to everyone else. And I think that becomes I think something about peer-to-peer training seems to be more effective than something where it's like a external or a lecturer trying to train someone on the team. So I would sort of incorporate those. Just very much a continuous learning approach.
Matt, what are your thoughts on training staff and have you seen that same process where it's easier kind of peer-to-peer as opposed to top-down? I guess is my own way of putting it.
no question about it. Right. So that's actually the approach we recommend. So we recommend, as a vendor, we recommend training up a group of a cohort of internal champions, right, that can drive this internally, right? I think when we're thinking about transition to a cloud system, though, our current solutions or legacy solutions, I get in trouble when I say that to my product management team. So if we just think about moving solutions to the cloud that offer the same capabilities, that doesn't get end users excited. Right? What gets them excited is a vendor identifying a core value add capability that then delivers that as a solution. The kind of the build it and they will come model, right? But really, we need to build capabilities in the cloud that can only be delivered by cloud solutions. And I think that is really the angle that we're looking at in order to drive adoption of cloud solutions. Ultimately, that's where we'll head with all our products. But I think from the outset, it's core value add capabilities that attract the end user.
And as you mentioned, legacy systems. What role do they play in cloud adoption? How can labs integrate the cloud, with their existing infrastructure without disrupting their daily workflows?
Yeah. So there are many different ways you could think about this, right? So you could have a cloud solution that that offers data storage, right? You could have a cloud solution that offers AI tools for or machine learning for peak identification, or you could have a solution which provides you with utilization across your entire fleet of instruments on a global basis that you wouldn't necessarily have access to through a standard typical on-prem solution, right? So these are capabilities that where cloud really fits very well and is attracted to an organization as a whole and attracted to end users because it provides them with increased tooling for better productivity, right? Better insights, better outcomes. And I think that's the way we're thinking about it, right? Is that we link our current or legacy systems to cloud environments to provide new capabilities that wouldn't be available if a cloud solution wasn't ready.
Andreas, what are your thoughts on integrating legacy systems with integrating cloud with legacy systems?
Well, this is really a challenge, right? Because it's not built for that, right? But honestly, the best integration would be if the user don't see it. So it means I'm looking for the seamless integration where the vendor keeps care, a hybrid environment, which is possible with some cloud environments, right? And you can have an edge computer or something like Matt showed us before. But always when you say cloud, I strongly believe when you go to a laboratory, they have a totally different view on what cloud is versus some technical guys. And cloud should enable the people to work more seamless. And it should not end in delays with transferring data of that, right? And this must be one of the key achievements when you implement in cloud to provide a business value with that.
And Christopher, do you have anything to add to that topic?
No, I mean, I can always add something, but I don't want to trying to be too redundant. I mean, I think that we are at the, and we did emphasize the need for sort of a hybrid architecture. And what that does is it becomes the philosophy of the business, right? So what you could say is, we're going to have our legacy systems remain and on-prem, and then all future applications exist in the cloud, and they can coexist. They can interconnect, right? You can create that sort of situation. But for those who want to go all in on all cloud everything, then you probably want to come up with a pretty thoughtful, comprehensive approach to how you would decommission many of those. We'll just say legacy systems, use Mark's term to not offend the IT guys. But we'll figure out a pretty thoughtful, phased, I think, decommissioning approach to how you would take those legacy systems offline. But in some cases, some organizations may decide they never want to take those legacy systems offline for one reason or another, right? And the cloud environment and these on-prem environments have to coexist. And so having that ability to sort of connect those two environments, I think, becomes very important. But this all goes back to what is the philosophy, the approach, the value system of the business and what they're trying to get. Because usually when you have these sort of different, whatever your migration approach is and where you ultimately end up going with it, it always going to come down to, I think three things. I think it's how do you determine and what is your business value? What are the things that you really deem to be value? I think it's going to boil down to sort of the technical complexity as far as how complex is the data sets or the data types or the data assets that you have that you're seeking to migrate in those associated applications. And then it becomes the risk tolerance. How much risk does your organization or risk profile? How much are your organizations, are they really willing to accept, as part of that migration, as part of that change? And I think that if you were to sort of focus on those things, then the rest of the things become a bit clearer as you move forward.
Absolutely. I think it's time to probably move on to our question and answer session. Apologies on my part, I've let it run over a little bit. Thank you all to our speakers for this very informative discussion. We're just now going to move over to our short Q&A. Firstly, how can labs ensure they're getting value from the cloud, or I guess getting the most value possible for their organization from the cloud? Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. And there's going to have to be what's the gap that you currently have as an organization, right? So it's a broad question, and I think it's very use case specific. And it's going to be a cost benefit analysis to compare the cost of the cloud adoption versus let's say the legacy infrastructure. So I think, but there's also a significant aspect of this, which is, what's the solution that you're choosing? I gave an example before about the machine learning for peak integration, right? How much time does that save you, right? It could actually save you dozens of hours a week as an organization, right? Is this something that is worth the investment in cloud infrastructure, right? So I think it comes down to the problem you're trying to solve, and then performing the cost benefit analysis of the solution or the problem you're trying to address.
Christopher, what are your thoughts on that topic? I think you mentioned earlier about kind of removing some of the need for kind of routine or menial tasks and allowing people to focus on their job.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. I also think if you start to identify what the greatest concerns are for the industry, I mean it does revolve around privacy. It does revolve around cybersecurity. It does revolve around these vast amounts of data we have and having an infrastructure that can actually scale to meet those demands. It does revolve around this this need for real-time access to the for the researchers. It also revolves around this ability to sort of be decentralized in how you approach research versus being all in a single physical location. And I think so if value is really determined, as Mark said, by the business and what they feel are their key priorities. But what we can talk about are a lot of the key benefits and considerations as you consider moving to a cloud computing environment. I think that's important. I think that many of those benefits have been pretty well articulated in this particular dialogue. So it becomes a question of, as you think about a business, what is the business imperative? I think for most, they would like to accelerate the time that it takes to do research, as it would be my guess for most people, right? And so, and then it becomes more or less, what does that mean for you, right? And what's your what level of disruption are you willing to take? Because you could just sort of reimagine the entire workflow And that could look vastly different than what you do today. You could decide that, yeah, the organizational maturity or the readiness is not quite at that level, so we would rather meet in the middle. We want to move forward, but we don't want to go all in. And so I think those different factors are what I would more use to define. Cost is always going to be there, right? I mean, you anytime you do sort of make this sort of investment, you're gonna want to put in cost considerations. But I think if you're going to factor in just actual direct costs, if it's going to cost me to move from X to Y, then I also think you have to factor in opportunity cost if you don't do that, right? And what you can consider, and because there is something to be said about the value and the ability to do research faster, to unlock the potential for others to be part of the process, and and I think those things can't be understated.
Andreas, well, from your expertise, what is your take on this topic and getting value out of the cloud?
Yeah, from the business perspective, immediately three things pop up in my mind, right? It would be data sharing, much more easy, right? Especially in a multi-site company. It's the speed of implementation. If you choose a software as a service, right, it's available tomorrow. No need for ordering hardware or something like that. And the last thing is when you work on data analytics, a cloud environment provides you the right environment to do it much more faster, as you have seen this on-prem. This is where I see the business value. There are a lot of other things, but it needs more deep dive. But in general, this is what we have seen in Roche.
Maybe I can just add one more thing. So there's a cost of doing nothing, right? So the way we try and work it through with our customers is it's a cost of doing something versus cost of doing nothing, and status quo always has a cost associated with it, right? So we take them through that as part of the cost benefit analysis, but where you're going to be in 5 years, we need to take that into consideration. So it's a multi-year cost benefit analysis, and it's that cost of doing nothing versus the cost of doing something. That's the angle we use.
Absolutely. Just finally, before we finish, I wanted to ask kind of where can hybrid cloud make the most impact? I think we talked a little bit earlier about, as an example of metadata in the cloud and large data on-prem. Who would like to have a go at this one? Christopher, would you like to address this topic first?
I would say I would go with how you treat those legacy systems and what your philosophy is on that. So if the goal is to go all native cloud applications going forward, then that to me is a slightly different approach than if you said that there are certain legacy systems that there's no alternative that I would consider. And so I think if you go that route of no alternative to my existing legacy systems that are cloud-based, then I would say that you're going to probably have a hybrid environment that's based on application, not necessarily on data size. And so I think that's one thing. And then I also think too, again, as part of this process, you're going to be able to sort of reimagine this sort of actual research workflow that goes along. And it becomes do you want to know how other organizations are really thinking about this and moving forward, or do you want to just sort of digitize your own processes in the cloud? I mean, which some people elect to do. And so it just becomes, again, it boils down to level of risk tolerance, level of acceptable disruption and the current workflows and how you want to approach that. But I think generally, in addition to sort of data sizing as being one of the factors, I would also put how you manage those legacy systems and what the long-term plan is for those.
Andreas, what are your thoughts on the impact of a hybrid cloud?
Yeah, I would say it's always the case if you have a brownfield environment, right? If an existing company, you have legacy systems like LIMS on-prem, you cannot change everything overnight. And you need a solid roadmap, which be enabled with this hybrid cloud, right? Can help you for the next years to stick on something on-prem, you cannot change overnight a SAP system, right? If you're a small biotech and have nothing, maybe you can start on a greenfield and build everything in the cloud. But I feel on huge companies, the hybrid cloud can help you to bridge the next years and see where you end there.
And Matt, do you have anything that you would like to add to this topic?
I think these assessments are absolutely correct. I'm in full agreement with these. I think maybe the other thing is, and it's really driven by the potential need for legacy systems for many years to come. That the larger data files that we're generating, which are in the kind of area of gigabytes per file, right? Do you want to transfer those up to the cloud and transfer them back down again for data processing? Right. In this particular case, maybe you just store the metadata in the cloud environment and then just have the large data files stored locally. So I think the necessary integration and support of legacy systems for potentially many years is really where a hybrid cloud implementation would be most beneficial.
But it also depends on the instrument vendors, right? If you have instruments in place, you always end in a hybrid environment.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, this brings us to the end of today's webcast. This content will remain live on Scientific Computing World website at www.scientific-computing.com for the next 12 months. So please spread the word if you have enjoyed this presentation. Of course, please note the live question and answer session will not work if you are watching on demand. Once again, thanks very much to our speakers, Matt Hazelwood, Christopher Boone, and Andreas Steinle. And of course, thanks to our sponsor, Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.